Good afternoon, everybody. Who's ready for the Jamf Nation party?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we got some people. Awesome. Well, hey, I don't want you to think about that party too hard because we got an awesome session here for you. If you came for the Jamf Concepts remediaSOAR, leveraging Jamf's APIs to transform security alert management, congratulations, you made it. You are in the right spot. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you your speaker today. He is a senior competitive intelligence analyst here at Jamf, Josh Thornton.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I mean, it's our last session of the day. That's a lot. I don't know about y'all. I'm a little tired. It's been a good event so far. And as Chris mentioned, the title of our session today is Jamf Concepts remediaSOAR. And Jamf Concepts is kind of an internal project that we have for anybody who works at Jamf that maybe isn't a part of our product team but wants to make something really cool. And I was also going for the longest session title ever. I don't know if I won or not. But as Chris mentioned, my name is Josh, and I am a part of our competitive intelligence team. So I spend a lot of time understanding how Jamf stacks up with our competitors and how we add value better than others. Been at Jamf now for about 5 years this month, and before that was at Apple for a little over 12. And it is my first time presenting at JNUC, so you get what you get. In terms of our session today, the first thing I want to share is while the title is the app that I built, remediaSOAR, it's not really a session about why my app is so cool. And I think it's pretty neat, but that's not really the focus. It's really about how I use the tools that we have in our tool belt and at our disposal to solve a problem that I saw or the challenge. And hopefully you see some of these ideas and it sparks some of your own and how you can solve some of those challenges you might face in your own workflows. And if it's really cool, I really hope you can share it, because I think that's one of the best parts about being an Apple admin or a Mac admin is the community we build. So why did I make this app? Really the challenge I saw was around reviewing and remediating alerts. And I have a video playing that just kind of walks through what the steps look like if you want to go through security alerts for a Mac and then eventually remediate it. And one of the first things I noticed is that there's a lot of tools involved. And it doesn't matter if you're with Jamf or any other vendor, oftentimes your management and security tools are separate, sometimes for a good reason. But that means that if you want to do more than just block or quarantine some known malware, there's a lot of extra steps to get there because you're having to move between multiple tools. And when we're thinking about Jamf Protect and macOS security alerts, a lot of times those are not known malware that's easy to block. Sometimes it's just something suspicious might be going on. Something's a little off that might be concerning. So one of those you might see is maybe you have a launch agent or a launch daemon that creates that persistence on the Mac, and it's pretending to be an Apple launch agent when it's really launching a process that is not Apple related at all. And so that isn't a guarantee that it's something malicious, but it should be something concerning, and that's where Jamf Protect will generate a security alert. In those security alerts, though, you're typically using these dashboards that are based on using them on a computer. They need a big old screen, and I really like sitting in my recliner, and I really like being able to do work no matter where I am. And so that desktop first can be a real challenge. And finally, if you're new to handling macOS security alerts, it can be a little unintuitive. You get something comes in, and you're like, I don't know what to do. And that can be another headache to solve as you're trying to figure out what can you do when something concerning happens. And so that's really where the idea for my app came from, is I wanted folks to be able to take that power of the Jamf platform and remediate security alerts no matter where you are, including your recliner, and be able to do it in a really mobile-friendly way, because sometimes if there's a concerning security event going on, you want to be able to fix it as fast as possible or prevent it from spreading. And so being mobile friendly where you can address it no matter where you are, be multi-platform, where you can pull together multiple solutions to address, and that's really done through the integrations and using Jamf's API. And so this app, it has integrations with Jamf Pro, Jamf Protect, and Jamf Security Cloud, and it automatically gathers any of the macOS security alerts that Jamf Protect identifies and brings them in so you can easily review them, mark them as in progress or resolve them. And then using Jamf Pro and using Jamf Security Cloud, you can run some neat remediation workflows all right from the same interface. So our toolkit we're going to talk through today is really first looking at the APIs that we have available. So that's using Jamf Protect, which is a GraphQL API, which is a little bit different if you're familiar and more comfortable with REST-based APIs, which is what Jamf Pro and Jamf Security Cloud use. And it's also pulling all of those APIs together using Swift and SwiftUI for a nice Apple native experience. So to get started with the Jamf Protect API, I just want to talk through each of these and give a quick overview of what they're like to use and how I'm using them to hopefully, again, spark some of those ideas. So Jamf Protect uses GraphQL. If you've never used GraphQL, I will tell you, candidly, I was really confused. I had no idea what I was doing as I started using GraphQL because it's a very different structure than anything I was comfortable with in the past. And so GraphQL is largely based on this idea of types and fields. Types are like your object. Could be a security alert or a computer or an analytic. And the fields are all the information about it. If your type is a computer, then a field might be your serial number or your model or the version of macOS that you're running. And as you're jumping in and starting to use GraphQL, if you've never done it before especially, even if you're accustomed to it, there's a tool that you can use called Altair GraphQL Client, which is really awesome for testing and debugging any of those GraphQL commands. And if you do want to set up and use Altair GraphQL Client, as a side note, there's a setup file for it to set up the environment for Altair to automatically start talking to Jamf Protect really easily. It's on our Learning Hub. Definitely check it out. But with GraphQL, you're really looking at two types of commands. You've got queries, which is all about retrieving data from the API, and mutations is anything you want to actually change when you want to make a change to the API. So with the Jamf Protect API, before you start using it, of course, you want to go ahead and create the right API client. And Jamf Protect uses this idea of roles, where you can define the permissions that your API will actually need to execute successfully. Now, you could just go in and say yes to everything. I would not do that. I would be restrictive and really specify what permissions you truly need. So in the case of remediaSOAR, I need to be able to read computers, I need to be able to read and write to alerts, and read analytics, for example. Once you create that role, you can create that specific API client, which gives you a client ID and password. And anytime you make an API call, you can get your access token based on those ID and password. Now, when it comes to retrieving alerts, which is a primary task for remediaSOAR, all of this is done with a GraphQL query. And one of the things I came to really love about GraphQL versus other APIs I've used is how easy it is to filter the results that you're looking for. So when you are specifying a query, like give me all the alerts from Jamf Protect, which is called list alerts, if your eyesight is amazing, you can see it on screen, but otherwise, you'll take my word for it. But you can specify things like maybe a date range, that you only want alerts that are within the last 7 days, or maybe you're looking for high severity alerts, or just alerts with the status of new or in progress, but nothing resolved. And when you do that with this query, you can also customize your results, which is really cool. You can say, I don't need all the information you have. I only care about a handful of things. So for me, when I'm grabbing an alert, I care about details on the alert, like the computer, and for the computer, what kind of model is it, what's the serial number of it, what version of macOS is it running. Care about things like the JSON feed behind the scenes that triggered the analytic, get details about the analytic that was triggered as well, and all of that's customizable, so I don't have to get everything Jamf Protect knows, just what I care about. Now, for changing or mutating alerts, I don't do much. It's really just all about that status in remediaSOAR. So in this case, when you have a long list of alerts, you can specify, are they new, in progress, or resolved? And this gives you a really quick way to specify in this mutation call that we want to update an alert. And we can just say, hey, here's the universally unique identifier for that alert and what our new status is. And if you do need to get something back, you can also, again, customize the results you get back from that API call. Now moving on a little bit to talk about how we use the Jamf Pro API. There's a couple Jamf Pro APIs out there you might have seen if you've done any API work. There's the classic API, which is full-featured, uses basic authentication, and it gives you XML data back. And Jamf Pro API is a little bit newer, uses JSON, continuing to grow and be developed. And both of those are REST-based APIs. So they have your typical gets commands and puts and patches, deletes, all of those fun REST-based commands for updating and retrieving data. And in remediaSOAR, we're really caring the most about how are we gathering our computer groups, how are we sending device lock commands, and how can we assign specific computers to specific static computer groups. And the reason we do that is for some cool remediation workflows we'll talk through. Now, just like Jamf Protect, there is a couple ways that you can authenticate. The traditional way, this is what my app uses right now, is user-based access. This is getting your bearer token, your authentication token from a username and password, and your permissions are based on what that username and password have available to it. The newer, more modern way, which I still need to adapt, is API roles and clients, where you can specify, again, being restrictive, the permissions that API needs to do just what it needs and nothing more. Now for computer groups, again, we call the API command for retrieving those computer groups. And I will say, if you're in an environment where you have a lot of static computer groups, you don't want a giant list that shows up here. So I do have some quick filtering so you can give a beginning of the name of your computer group, something like API or remediation, and it will only show you those groups. And we use those to update every time we want to add a computer to one of these groups. We just provide the serial number, which we get from the Jamf Protect query. And the reason we do this is because we can do and go a lot further than just that block and quarantine of known malware. Now, if we see something suspicious, we can actually have workflows or remediation defined within Jamf Pro that we can run on here. And I'll show an example of that here in a couple slides. We can also use the Jamf Pro API for sending device commands. So in this case, primarily we're using it for device lock. If you have a security alert come through that's very concerning, you really want to make sure that computer is shut down and isn't used until you can get your hands on it, you can send a device lock command. Anytime you're doing something like this, I recommend, especially if you're making your own app, add a lot of checks, because you don't want someone to accidentally hit this on your CEO's computer. But this is a really great way where, again, the serial number from the Jamf Protect query from the alert, we can set a passcode and a message like see your IT team, and that device will get locked and is no longer in use. Now, when it comes to these workflows and how you might define them, the biggest thing I would suggest is consider what kind of outcomes that you're looking for. So as an example, I mentioned that one possible persistence technique is creating a launch agent or launch daemon that's disguised and trying to pretend to be Apple. Well, maybe you have a script that clears out any launch agents or launch daemons that shouldn't be in your environment. And you could have that script scoped to a static computer group. So if you add one of your computers that you're getting a launch agent or launch daemon alert for, you can add that computer to the group, and it can automatically run that remediation workflow and clear out any launch agents or launch daemons. Or alternatively, say you've got a configuration profile for all your Wi-Fi settings and getting on your network. You can have a static computer group set as an exclusion. So maybe you're excluding anybody that's in a isolate from network group. So if you add a computer to that isolate from network, it will remove your Wi-Fi settings and it can't get on your network anymore. Now, the final API tool from Jamf that we use here is Jamf Security Cloud. And Jamf Security Cloud, it does a lot. One of the aspects of it is for creating secure connectivity, like a VPN, that ZTNA approach, where you can set app-based microtunnels for specific network resources. So maybe you want to make sure that all of your traffic that goes to GitHub is secure and encrypted from your users' devices. Well, when you create that app-based tunnel, you can set a risk tolerance, where it's really, hey, I want to make sure that no resources can access GitHub unless their risk score is low or secure. But if it's medium or high, I really don't want it on GitHub. And Jamf Security Cloud does a lot of work to automatically set those risk scores. It'll look and say, has it detected a web threat on that Mac? Has it, does it have vulnerabilities in the operating system or specific applications? Does it, does the user have a password set? All of those are different criteria that can be used for Jamf Security Cloud to automatically set that risk score. But we're talking about behavioral analytics that may or may not be a clear-cut, yes, block this, or no, don't block this. And that's where being able to override the risk score is really handy. So if I get a security alert that comes in the example here on the screen is, a reverse shell was detected, well, that's a concern for me. And so I can automatically say that this device, this Mac, is a high risk. And now any of my app-based tunneling that requires something to be less than high risk now automatically is disconnected and won't work on that Mac. It's a great way to reduce some risk. Now, bringing together these APIs, for me, I chose to do it in Swift because I wanted an Apple native app, and there's a really great chance to pull that together. And there's a lot of ways you might use these APIs, of course, whether they're in scripts or Python or web frameworks. But when it comes to Swift, I wanted to share some suggestions that I found to be really important when working with these APIs. The first is really understanding how are you storing the user's credentials. Because really, and if it's going on the App Store and it's not something just for you to use yourself, that should be a primary concern because we're talking about some very sensitive data here. And there's a few ways that Apple provides for creating persistent data when you're programming with Swift. The first is user defaults. User defaults is awesome because it's super easy to use, it's fast, programmatically it's like a line or two of code and you can store and retrieve data within your application. But it's not very secure. It's really great for very fast, often like user preference type information, kind of quick hit preferences or simple state that you're looking to store, like did the user see the splash screen already? Or does this user, what's their date preference? Core data gets a little more in depth. It can be secure, but it's really wieldy for a storage solution for something like credentials. And you also have to consider what about iCloud data storage and all of that. Swift data is similar to core data. It's built on it. A little bit easier to use, but again, pretty significant overhead. And finally, it's really Keychain is the best solution I've found when it comes to storing these user credentials. Keychain can be tough because it takes a lot of code It's not just a line or two for storing data, but there are some really good frameworks and wrappers out there you can use to make it very easy to access. But this way, you've got very secure ways to store those user credentials that can't be extracted easily from a device. Now, also when we're talking about using these APIs in Swift, a lot of consideration, I think, should go into how we authorize ourselves as an API client. And the first is, would you use your client ID and your password, and you get that authentication token or that bearer token, you also get a default expiration time when it tells you when that token will no longer be applicable. And so when you get that, save it, because instead of every time you make an API call creating a new authorization token, you can just check to see, is my current token still valid? Otherwise, you're gonna have a bunch of authentication tokens that are created, and it's probably gonna be okay, but it ends up in more API calls and a little bit slower runtime. And finally, I also think it's kind of nice to consider what happens to these authorization tokens when the app loses focus. If the user switches to the background or they close the app, what do? You can easily have some watch for change code that can call a function to invalidate your token. So that way, if the user switches apps, any live authentication tokens are automatically expired, and I just rest easier knowing that things are a little more secure. Now, the final piece that I wanted to call out when it comes to building a native app is considering concurrency, or how things are happening at the same time. So with Swift, and specifically SwiftUI, all of its user interface work is done with that highest priority, what they call high priority thread, or the main thread. And that is what really helps make sure, if you're on an iPhone or an iPad or even a Mac, your interface stays really buttery smooth. Feels fantastic to use, even when you're downloading a bunch of data at the same time. You want to make sure that if you're calling Jamf Protect and downloading thousands of alerts, your interface keeps running smoothly. And so that's where anytime we're calling APIs, we want to do them asynchronously or on a background task. And SwiftUI will even help warn you and say, hey, you're trying to call some code that is asynchronous and making some network calls. You probably don't want to do this in the main thread and slow everything down. That same tip is true if you're processing data after the fact. If you downloaded 1,000 alerts, in remediaSOAR, once I download them, I'm storing them in a specific data format for my app. I'm using Swift data, and all of that I want to happen behind the scenes, so someone can still continue to use that app even while things are downloading in the background. And finally, Apple provides some really cool tools for handling concurrency and handling background work. So things like Async Await is a really easy framework for managing these active and background tasks compared to some strategies from even just a few years ago with Swift. And they even have a new option called Actors, which I use. It's really just a way to make sure no two processes are trying to modify the same data at the same time and creating some either inaccurate data or even app crashes. So that's really how we've used Swift to pull together those apps. And the end result is we take all of our platform APIs, and we can now take and approach that challenge of what do we do with all these security alerts? How do we view them? How do we remediate when they come in? And we've got a really nice workflow where from the app, I can learn about an alert. I even have Apple Foundation model built in where it'll explain a little bit more about the security alert that came in. And through those integrations with Jamf Pro and Jamf Security Cloud, you can run some really nice remediations. It makes it super easy to use without you having to bounce between multiple devices. And because it's Swift and SwiftUI, you can write it more or less once, maybe 1.25 times, and have it run across Apple's fleet, which is really nice when you're developing an app to get some of that automatically for free with minor formatting depending on which platform you're targeting. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, it's not all about just like sharing why I think my app is cool. Hopefully, you can start thinking through what are some of the challenges you have within your workflows, and how can using Jamf APIs along with other vendors' APIs for your specific tech stack, how can you bring those together to create something cool? Whether that's a Apple native Swift app or another script, that is really what I'm hoping to be able to see. I love cool stuff. Anyway, that's what I got for y'all. Any questions? And I do have on a QR code here if you want to check out the project. This is a link to the GitHub page for remediaSOAR, and there's also on that page a direct link to the remediaSOAR in Apple's App Store, so you can download it. Sweet. If you do have questions and you think about it later, either grab me as the session wraps up, or you can always email remediaSOAR@jamf.com, and that will come right to me as well, or even submit a GitHub issue, and that will come in too. But thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. I know it's the end of a long day. I hope to see all of you at the party tonight, where I'm personally ready for some delicious food and beverages, hopefully some entertainment. That's what I got. Thank y'all. Appreciate it.